program just see, got it.
Got it. Okay.
That's it. If you click on got it, that means you want to be in it. That's
I
great.
got it.
Yeah.
So excellent. So I invite you to, I'm just going to do like a little brief introduction to remind everybody that yes, this is being recorded. And if you find whether you or some others that are interested in reviewing the material, I am sure, I don't know where exactly it's located, but apparently you need to ask Aparna for that link because I'm told that it's not offered publicly to everybody. Apparently, my words are really explosive, so therefore, no, just kidding. Uh, so that's number one. Number two is let's remind ourselves that last week we talked about Psalm 30, the dedication of a temple, the dedication of Hanukkah, etc., etc. I'm saying this because it might be somewhat relevant to our discussion for this evening. And the third thing that I would like to say is please try to remain not mute yourselves, but rather in the Zoom mute, unless there is something important you want to tell us. Do that through the chat. And then, of course, just a few minutes before the end of the session, I will give you an opportunity to express yourselves, to talk to me. We're going to have some questions around yes, translations and other things on it. The first thing I'd like to do, and for that I'm going to share the this the screen. We're going to listen to a recording of this Psalm 23 on the words by the musician and theater person Yossi Banai. So, by the way, let me know that sometimes I'm going to share the text for you, but not always. It so happens that that when I put the recording on, it just it's hard. So I'm first of all, before I'm doing that, I know that I have to make sure that I share the sound. Just to do that, I'm gonna do it one more time. Excellent. So now I hope that you hear this. If you don't, let me know.
אדוני רואי לא אחסר, בנאות דשא ירביצני, על מי מנוחות ינהלני. נפשי ישובב, ינחני במעגלי צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך, המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי. דישנת בשמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
So I wanted to begin by saying this is how Psalm 23 is read in the original Hebrew with the cadence, with the proper accentuation, right? Yenachamoni, And sometimes we are familiar, as I heard Edie singing as an introduction, of a Mogister version, where the accentuation of the words is not necessarily according to the Hebrew accentuation that we are familiar today, nor, may I say, to the way that is accentuated with the metek on the Tehillim, on the Psalms, on the Tanakh. Before we go even farther, I wanted to ask you, when we talk about Psalm 23, what do you associate it with? You can then unmute and answer if there is something that you're...
Funerals.
Say that again, Fred?
Funerals.
Funerals, yes, indeed. Something else, anybody? Clearly, everybody is associating Tehillim. Richard, did you want to say something?
Along a similar line, Yizkor.
Aha. All right. So something related to death in some way or fashion. In the Ashkenazi community, the accent is put into words. I'm going to share the screen one more time so you can see the text if you don't have it close to you. And the words that are the ones most emphasized in this case, Gam ki elech begeit salmavet, let's translate, and even though I walk, ki in this case is not because, but if I walk begeit salmavet, if remember the word salmavet is a construction of the word sel, that means shadow, mavet, death, the shadow of death, begeit shalmavet, and it says lo irara, I fear no evil or nothing bad. Why? Ki, in this case, yes, because for ata imadi, presumably the ata is the U with a big with a big Y. Ki ata imadi. This is something that we discussed last week. We'll remember that we talked about Adon Olam, at the end of Adon Olam, that we saying the same idea, right? That I have no fear because you are with me. So the reason why I point this out is because one of my intentions is to recognize something that many times in Tefillah doesn't occur. When we talk about Tefillah and when we talked about Psalms that inspire us, we are many times really putting the accent on being proper, of having the timing right, that yes, the finishing on time, this is always a concern that is magnified, especially for those that lead, the people that have their chronometers. They want to make sure that we finish on time. And something that it's really important is that we many times forget that there is a tefillah that is mostly bein adam lamakom, between us human beings and God. Yes. So we assist in the Ashkenazi world. That's gam ki elech begeit salmavet lo irara ki ata imadi. That's the central element of why we get Psalm 23 to be iconic to Iskor, to funerals, yes, to moments of death. I'm going to share the screen again and show you that this is not shared, this idea is not shared necessarily by all communities. The Sephardic and the Eidot HaMizrach, somehow called Oriental Jews, for any better word, they disagree with this idea. They see Psalm 23 as a positive and I would say, optimistic psalm. Where do they take that for? Dishanta bashemen roshi, you anoint my head with oil. Presumably the idea is like the kings in antiquity, that when you are anointed with oil, right? In the Middle East, the oil, of course, being plentiful. My head with oil, roshi, and then the critical words, kosi revaya, that my cup overflows. And therefore, it's not surprising that the Kiddush on Shabbat morning, somebody may have heard me sing Adonai Rohi lo echsar vinodeh sheyarbitzeni al mei menuchot yenaleni. So what is this? This is the chanting of Tehillim, by the way, a chanting that has been lost in the Ashkenazi community. In some communities in the world, such as Moroccan Jews, they still retain the way of chanting Tehillim. And one of the things that it's important on Shabbat morning is to recognize, since we have a kos right in our hand saying Kiddush, that kosi revaya. And in fact, furthermore, you may be familiar with some Hasidic idea from that. What is that they do? You have to cover the kos, right? The cup of wine completely. Why? Kosi revaya. The idea is that in the same way that our lives have so many blessings, they are plentiful of them, and certainly on Shabbat, so it is the cup that we recite Kiddush from. So I invite you for this to see how many times already we look into different perspective and the richness of the psalm, that you can see it in completely different ways, right? And yet both ideas are in fact in there. Both of them are important in the message that is given. I'm going to come back to share, because I want to take you to another place that is also, I think, of interest to us. Mizmor LeDavid, a question I translated here, a psalm of David. Le would be two, perhaps, but one wonders, well, if we said last week that Tehillim was composed by Melech David, by King David, what is this Mizmor LeDavid, this koteret, this title, which is, if you noticed, how Yossi Banai did not recite it, being the title of it. So a psalm of David, to David, but certainly not that David sung it. So here is one of the expressions of why there are a number of commentators that say that perhaps not all the psalms, not all the Tehillim have actually been composed by King David. But then it says, Adonai ro'i lo echsar. Here comes, I noticed the very interesting conversation just prior to us entering this discussion this evening, about the idea that many of you, I don't know how many of you, are familiar with the recitation of Psalm 23 in school. How many of you had to do that? Edie did, right? Phil, Fred, okay, Marilyn, yes, good, a few of you, and you probably, when you see the way that I have translated this, you notice that it's not the translation that you are familiar with, right? So let me say something about these words, lo echsar, lo echsar. Translated I have learned that when you say God is my shepherd, I have
God is my shepherd, I shall not want.
I shall not want. Thank you. I shall not want. Now I'm told you may know better than me that in Old English, I shall not want means that you don't lack anything. David agrees with Baruch Hashem. That's so good. That if David agrees with me, that's that's good. No, so seriously, so this is what I have been told. That's why I translated "I shall lack nothing," because I think that when we read it, "I shall not want," gives the impression that we don't want anything, unless we are familiar with this rather for us obscure historical reading. So I wanted to know that just from there is also this element of the fact that kosi revaya, that our cup is plentiful and we lack nothing. Yes. So the whole concept, in my view, is that the tone of this Tehillim 23 is basically a tone that gives the impression, at least for now, that we really that we lack nothing, that our lives are full of blessings. And then it says the words Adonai Ro'i. So God is my shepherd, Adonai is my shepherd, and the idea of Adonai is my shepherd meaning what? What are the attributes of a shepherd? And do you recall any particular shepherds? And I'm sure you do. Tell me.
Pretty much all our ancestors.
Aha, exactly. And Edie?
Well, the secular idea that we are used to seeing in the medieval pictures is the shepherd is as a weak, he's guarding sheep. You don't have to be very strong to do that. But in fact, in biblical times, the shepherd was fighting off wolves and lions and tigers and bears.
Correct.
He was a very powerful vision. He was a protector of the flock. I mean, they would go out there and they didn't have anybody else out there helping them. So
yes.
Maybe a dog, maybe.
Phil?
But most important, wasn't David a shepherd?
Yep.
So David was a shepherd.
Yes, that Melech David was a shepherd. Moshe Rabbeinu was a shepherd.
And I think that's important, at least for me, to understand. This past weekend, the Haftarah about David dying as a very old man, compared with what David really was. If he was a shepherd, then he is in a position to write this kind of psalm. His has a different personality, especially when he was younger.
Right, but thank you for that, because what I want to put the emphasis here is that the qualities of the shepherd that we are talking about are not necessarily the ones that take them to war. I want to submit to you that the fact that the shepherd is able to count the animals that he has around, that protects, that pays attention, that finds them, and if one of them is left behind, he runs to pick it up and bring it back. And in fact, I thought that again in the Yamim Noraim, if you remember in the Untanet Tokef, right? What is that God is doing? God, this is the ultimate shepherd. What God is doing is counting, right? What is God counting? Kama yavrun bekama yivariun, mi yichyeu mi yamut, right? God is counting us. And so in a sense, Adonai Ro'i is correct. Is that the dialogue between the generations, how Melech David is saying that God is this compassionate figure, that is looking upon all of us to make sure that we lack nothing, or that at least we have the potential for developing into whatever we want to be. So let me just move on a little bit and say other things like that are important for us to know, like binot deshe yarbitzeni. God makes me lie down in green deshe is pastures, right? Grass, right? Lie down yarbitzeni in the sense of pleasantness, right? Al mei menuchot yenahaleni, leads me beside still waters, right? And the word I wanted to remember, the words may, the compounds maim shel, right? Waters of. What are those waters? Waters of menuchot. Why am I saying this now? I'm saying it for a very important. Menuchot, from the word menucha, right? Of pleasantness, of stillness. Because what is that we normally say when we use the word maim? We actually use it most of the times as maim chaim. Maim chaim. Why am I saying that? If we actually are careful to look at what happens to our sisters and brothers in California or in other parts of the country, where the maim are not necessarily mei chaim, but mei yebul, right? They are incredible torrents of water that actually are creating destruction. And if you notice, in some communities, when you say morid mashiv haruach umorid hageshem, the answer is livracha, right? Because we are asking for this, right? Let's translate that the wind would flow, or and the water will fall, especially in the land of Israel where it is so necessary. Livracha is the answer that people, you may have heard me say that at some points. Livracha. I want to connect with this because for a moment I want to take you to a different place. I want to take you to Germany on the 1800s. More specifically, I want to take you to Franz Schubert, the famous composer, that he actually composed a version on Psalm 23. And you'll notice the description, we'll talk a little bit in a minute, but the idea of pleasantness, of green pastures and what have you, are prevalent in his composition of this. I'm going to share it with you, the text both in the German as well as in the translation, so you can actually see it. Gott ist mein Herd, right? And God is my shepherd. I say I would lack nothing, and this is his own version of it. I hope you can actually hear it. So clearly a different reading than ours. Schubert, a romantic composer, is interested in basically two things. One of them, nature, and therefore you notice the elements of comfort and the pleasantness and the green pastures and the idea of valleys and this concept of nature that is so dear to romantic composers, and also the idea of a very, very enormous and grandiloquent God, right? And so how the crescendo over God's name is palpable. I mean, we can talk about this a long, long time, and how the pictorial idea that when we're talking about for the right, so Shavti bebeit Adonai leorech yamim, the idea of sitting in, when it says, in God's house for the extension of time, leorech yamim. Yes. So what's really happening? And by the way, please remember, as we make the connection with Psalm 30, that again we're talking about the Beit Adonai, right? God's house. Which one is God's house? Well, for Schubert, nature is God's house. For us, maybe the synagogue, the temple, or like we said last time, this Mikdash Me'at, this idea that our own home is a sanctuary, it's the house of God. And then, of course, the idea for King David, very dear, that he could not be able to achieve, but he definitely dreamt with, the idea of the Bet Hamikdash, the temple with a big T. Yes, the idea that we are looking into this place that became the place for unification of God. And notice, of course, that then when the temple is destroyed, the voices that come says, does it mean Lama Zavtani? Why, God, why have you abandoned us? Is it possible that if the temple is destroyed, is God saying that we are not God's children any longer, right? But not here. But the desire here, Beshavti bebeit Adonai leorech yamim, and the idea how Schubert brings together. I don't know if you notice, I was trying to show you as the music progressed, right? Notice that the translation is a little bit different than the one that we are familiar. Certainly familiar from the famous English version that we all have tasted once. And so I want to ask you, we are talking about a Shulchan Aruch, and we are not talking about the 12th step of the Seder. I'm going to put this again, because this is another of the moments that sorry, I'm going to take you to, yes, I hope, I guess I have to do it again. I don't think you will be able to see it. Yes. So, נפשי ישובב ינחני במגלי צדק למען שמו. So my soul God restores, right? Again, an idea that we take very deeply into Shabbat. ינחני במגלי צדק למען שמו. God leads me in the path of righteousness for God's למען שמו, for God's name's sake. And then we have this other idea that I wanted to share with you. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan. You prepare in front of me, or before me, a table. Neged tzorerai. King David certainly had many enemies. So So the idea is, what do you think when King David or whoever composed it says Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan, you spread the table for before me. What's there? What do you think it's on that table? Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan.
I'd say almost for a meal,
For a
for
meal.
for a yeah,
Uh-huh.
that we're going to get together and we're going to have a
That's
meal.
right. Because if you're going to have a meal in ancient times, it had to follow the agreement to have a peace treaty. Then you would have a meal with the enemies that you made the peace treaty with.
So as somebody said, you don't make peace with your friends, right? So so interesting. And then ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni, the goodness and compassion run after me. Yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, for the rest of my life. Again, remember the Haggadah when we say yemei chayai. The sages say, Azai, if you remember, Yemei Chayai, my days. Why call Yemei Chayai? Yemei Chayai should have, one say, suffice. Isn't the days of my life all the days of my life? Why call Yemei Chayai? So the rabbis sometimes translate not only during the day but also at night. At a time when we may have some uncertainty, some difficulty, some right. So, and what is that is gonna come after me and or me around me or the funi like a rodef, like running after me? Ach, tov v'chesed, goodness and compassion. In other words, the idea that we are anchored in life with this element of a connection, I would say a direct connection with God, and the idea that that's not enough. The idea that if I have a connection with God suffices, I hope we all have it. And in fact, I argue, as I keep saying it, that we could do more to cultivate that relationship. But it's not only bein adam lamakom, not only between human beings and God, but bein adam lechavero, also between us. And that is where the tov and the chesed are important. In the same way that we feel that God has given us that goodness and that kosir revaya and that over full cup, and I lack nothing. Therefore, it's not enough that I'm a person hasameach bechelko, like Pirkei Avot says, right? That I'm happy or joyful with my take in life, but also that I spread it. That I spread it. And before I make you listen to something else, I want to propose the following. The idea of mitzvah goreret mitzvah. Kind of like a nuclear explosion, if one wants. Imagine mitzvot, the idea that a mitzvah produces or creates or implies the continuation of a mitzvah, right? The idea that whatever mitzvah we are actually doing is l'shem shamayim. That the mitzvot, because we don't know what's gonna bring. Is it going to be that one day we had a student 20 years later that is actually doing good in the world and can remind us that it's because of something we have taught, of something that we inspired in her, in him. So I propose that this is the idea. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni. The idea that goodness and chesed and compassion surround us almost, with the idea that we constantly thinking about bringing it into the world. Give me one more time to show you one more thing that I wanted to see. This is going to be in English, so implies no translation. Is Bobby McFerrin version of Psalm 23. Let me see if I can find that for you. Please let me know if you cannot see it.
The Lord is my shepherd. I have all I need. She makes me lie down in green meadows, beside the still waters she will lead. She restores my soul. She rights my wrongs. She leads me in a path of good things and fills my heart with songs. Even though I walk through a dark and dreary land, there is nothing that can shake me. She has said she won't forsake me. I'm in her hand. She sets a table before me in the presence of my foes. She anoints my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will live in her house forever, forever and ever.
Okay. So, any reflections on this? What is the yes, Richard?
I think it was less earthly and more otherworldly, more spiritual. It was beautiful.
It was beautiful and very interesting what Richard says, because Richard calls it spiritual. I would argue that for the Romantics to be in connection with nature was quite spiritual. But I see what you mean. You think it's something more internal, something more deeper inside of us, right? And the work.
Yes.
I want to hear about something that should have really bothered you. And on purpose I brought it in. Fred.
Well, obviously, the he/she switch
Yes,
was evident from the very beginning.
you won the car.
Yeah,
So one of the
right.
things, right? So one of the things that I was thinking that everybody was going to tell me about is that he actually uses God as a she, you think. Except that if you were to do what I did, which is to buy the score, you're going to find that he actually, by the way, you notice that I actually did not finish it because the rest of it is the doxology in the in the Catholic Church. I'm not sure that you would have want me to play it, just in case I just left it out. If you want, I'll be happy to share with you the link and you can go and listen to that. But it's nothing, the music and everything else. And when I do it with my choirs, I always leave it out, and no one seems to be 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 concerned about it. But in his comments, he says that the she is not God, that he dedicated this composition to his mother. Again, right? Marilyn, I'm coming for you. Just a second. But the idea that a motherly love and the idea of God being a mother, and it's actually provocative, and I wanted to share this with you, perhaps thinking that this is something that might have been a bit unusual and you would have not been able to find it on your own. Marilyn, please.
I think you just said it. We talk about the feminine attributes of God, and we talk about mothers and women being nurturing. That's generally the viewpoint, not necessarily they're the only ones, but that's generally the viewpoint. And we talk about God as feminine, with feminine attributes.
That's absolutely true. And we talk about one of the names of God, of course, is Shekhinah, right? So the idea that there is a feminine element, a motherly element, especially in Kabbalah, for sure, but not entirely. But the idea that Bobby McFerrin actually consistently uses in his composition she is something that if it were to bother some of us in the Jewish world, you might imagine how that much would be uh, shocking perhaps for members of other religions, where again the idea of the masculinity, whether of shepherd and not a shepherdess, and things of that sort, he turns them around. So I thought this would be instructive. I want to spend my last 3 minutes to see if you have any comments or anything that you want to ask about it, and that hopefully I can shed some light to it. Edie.
Okay. You say Kol Yemei Chayai, the days, and Yamei Chayai, the days, Kol Yemei Chayai, the days and the nights. Isn't there a drash that says Yemei Chayai, the world here today, and Kol Yemei Chayai, the hereafter?
And that
Isn't that
indeed
from
is also part of the
Brachot
Amidah.
somewhere, like the beginning of Masachet Brachot? I think I found that.
Yes, and it's also part of the Agadah. The Agadah brings both exceptions to that. For my purpose, I thought I wanted to include this world more than the world to come, because the whole concept of the evenings, yes, contains in itself this idea of darkness that we have to deal. Certainly, I'm looking at David. I see your children probably may have sometimes issues with you turning off the lights at night. So the idea that we have already from an early age, the sense that we are vulnerable, when darkness happens. Ironically, I would say that many times that's not the case in Judaism. If you think of Selichot, if you think of other times where actually we begin our prayers and we find the connection being deeper when there is an absence of light. But yes. Any other comments? Yes, Marilyn.
So isn't chesed in Kabbalah, isn't chesed the feminine side of
Yes,
God? And so this is saying chesed will follow me, chesed will pursue me. So it is giving both of those sides of God's protection.
Again, that yes, and right, because I wanted to remember that that the beauty of all this is that we can look at all this of this text in so many different ways, so we are able to say the richness allows us to think differently, and perhaps when you're reciting this text or reading it to yourself, you can find other metaphors, other connections. I'm cognizant of my time. I know that I have asked and invited to finish at this same hour, 10 minutes till 8. So Minyan can continue. I want to invite you to come back next week, where we're going to be looking at a very, very rich psalm, Psalm 118. As always, I say, if there is anything during the week that you would like to ask me, actually, what I could do, for those of you that are interested, let me just put on the on the chat.
I believe that we will.
On the chat, the link of this final Psalm 23, in case that you want to listen to it or to show it to anyone. Here it is. And with that, I say Erev Tov. Thank you so much for coming over, and hope to see you not only next week, but this Shabbat, when I have the privilege to come to TBI to be inspired by your tefillah.
Thank you, Hazzan, Tasat. And since Steve just joined the group, I want to welcome Steve Sachs back, and wish him mazel tov on the birth of not one, but 2 great grandchildren. So mazel tov and welcome back.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
I will stop the recording now so we can go into Minyan without being recorded.
Yasher koach, Hazzan Tasat. Thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you in just a few days.
Amen, amen, amen. Thank you very much, everybody, for your attention.